To learn more, we are joined now by Ravi Ramamurti. He is the director of the Center for Emerging Markets at Northeastern University. That's in Newton, Massachusetts. Let me get your thoughts on the sense of things. We know the markets hate uncertainty. Once again today, Wall Street jolted. We see the volatility there. What do you see? Where do you see things heading, and what impact is all of this going to have on the markets?
Well, the markets don't like uncertainty, as you know, and what the latest developments do is add to the uncertainty. It's not as if some really terrible trade war has broken out, but it is the worry about the possibility of such a war breaking out that has markets nervous. And if you look at the Chinese response today, I think the message that I take away from it is that China is prepared to respond in proportion to the U.S. action, but fully in proportion. So it's not going to be a muted response, but it is going to be a response that will keep up with the U.S. action. And so knowing President Trump and his inclination to up the pressure when he's attacked, the question is, will the U.S. Continue to take more aggressive steps, and will China continue to match those steps? In that scenario, we could actually have a pretty extensive trade war.
Mm-hmm. And there are some predictions that the Trump administration will be out soon with its tariff target list, perhaps this week. These, of course, the Chinese industries benefiting from the Made in China 2025 blueprint. There will be time for input before they're implemented. So walk us through this. How do you see things playing out, and who might be targeted?
Well, I think one of the lessons the administration may have taken away from the first round of announcements is that when you try to protect your producers, you also hurt some of your exporters. And therefore, this time they're going through a step in which they're allowing U.S. producers to react to whatever they're proposing, and they will then try to design a set of tariffs that will hurt China without hurting American producers or American consumers. And when you winnow down that list, I think you can eventually find products for which the U.S. can source from other countries relatively quickly so that American consumers and firms are not affected by the protectionist measures, but the damage and the pain in China must be high. Of course, China knows this, and China has already created its own list of industries and products in which exactly the same outcome can be imposed on the U.S. That is, one in which you hit the other country where it hurts politically without hurting your consumers, your own domestic consumers, economically.
Mm-hmm. Last week, I spoke to a soybean farmer in Iowa. They're concerned, of course, that's a market that's very jittery right now because they rely on China. They export so much. And China can turn to other countries for those soybeans. So this has wide-ranging implications and could actually impact some of Trump's supporters, couldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I think soybean is a great example of a product where China could hurt the U.S., particularly in places where President Trump has a strong political base, which is in the Midwest, and yet not hurt its own consumers because Brazil is the largest supplier of soybeans to China. Brazil has had a good crop this year, and they could switch from buying from Brazil instead of buying it from the U.S., and thereby inflict pain in the U.S. without hurting their own consumers. And that is a much bigger deal, as you know, than what's been done so far with respect to pork.
Right. Well, I was just going to ask, you know, we've seen this movie before. Bush and Obama both went with tariffs. It didn't work the way they had hoped. They both backed off from it. But you don't see Trump as the type that backs off things. So how long does this thing wind out, do you think?
Well, I don't think anybody knows exactly what is in the playbook, in Trump's playbook. So we're going to have to see how it plays out. My sense is that he tends to improvise and make things up as he goes along. So it's quite possible that we don't know what the end game is. But it's also possible that President Trump will just simply declare victory for having confronted China on some of these issues. And I think he may get a few advantages without having an all-out trade war, such as maybe China being a little bit less aggressive in its pursuit of technology from U.S. companies, possibly some companies deciding to make things in the U.S. rather than import them from other parts of the world, just to avoid the uncertainty of protectionism. And, you know, small measures like this, which may make a little bit of a difference without doing too much damage to U.S. exporters. Now, whether you can walk that fine line remains to be seen.
Yeah, well, we'll be watching it. That's certainly going to be the case. Thanks so much for joining us and your insights.